Hello, viewers of the future. Welcome to this Teaching Tip Live on creating accessible pages in Canvas. I appreciate you taking your time from the future utopia and your flying cars to spend a little bit of time learning how to make a more equitable classroom. My name is Chris Lott. I'm the learning designer here at the UW-Tacoma Office of Digital Learning. And the main thing I want to draw your attention to is that you can always navigate to our website and find information about this Teaching Tip Live, previous Teaching Tips and Teaching Tip Live sessions, all of our support material for faculty development and professional learning. So I can go to that website and show you. From here, you always have access to the Digital Learning News and Muse blog that will have the most recent items as well as an archive of everything else along with other material. So that's where I'm going to start the presentation today. Obviously, the registration information and links will go away. There is a Google Doc here that you can access if you want to print and share the majority of the content I'm going to cover today in a way that kind of works on paper. But I'm going to be working from modules in Canvas, which is going to be a little more realistic. So first, why would you care about this? There are two reasons. One is it's the law, so you kind of need to do it, or you could face trouble, as could the institution here of UW. The other is that having accessible content will save you future time in dealing with requests that come through either formally or informally, as well as creating a more equitable classroom because the content that you make is accessible in a variety of ways using different tools, including screen readers, but not just those. So this really does matter. And I think taking this proactive approach to doing it, to dealing with accessibility, rather than the reactive approach to accommodation, will save you time and effort, and it's just a better way to go. So working with designing accessible content from the beginning, accessible by design or born accessible content is the way to go. So we're talking here about this proactive work to create accessible content. An accommodation request is a specific legal and policy action where you will hear from the Disability Resources Office that student X needs particular accommodations. Now, some of these aren't accessibility issues that you can design for ahead of time. They may need extra time for exams, for instance. But many times this will have to do with students who have visual impairments or hearing impairments or other cognitive issues that demand use of other tools besides just looking at a web page like most of us, or at least I do. In this context, you need to remember also that you won't always know that your students have a disability or have a need where accessible content would be particularly useful to them. I am slightly hard of hearing. I don't make an accommodation request typically, but it really helps me to have things that would make it content more accessible for the hard of hearing or the deaf. So captions in particular are helpful to me. Now, many students don't disclose these disabilities. I had a student once in a web programming class of all things who I didn't know was blind until about 4 or 5 weeks into the semester, because I then posted a piece of inaccessible content, a PDF, which we won't be talking about in this particular session, but we will in a future one. And he had just never gone through the office. He just didn't feel a need to. And so I'd never received a formal accommodation request and I didn't know. I was thankful that I was learning to design accessible content by default, but it really brought home to me how important it is. In this context, we are beholden to some legislative apparatus as well as some guidelines. The legislation that's important is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Title II of ADA, and this Washington State OCIO policy. And these all overlap in terms of federal funding. Institutions receive federal funding, which we do, state institutions like we are, as well as public colleges and universities. Now, you don't have to read all the legalese unless you are, I don't know, unless you like that kind of thing. But practically speaking, this means 3 things. 1, if you get a formal accommodation request, you need to fulfill it. 2, you must provide equal access to all of your course materials, and equal access means both of the same quality and within the same time frame. So lesser substitutions are not equal access. That's part of the equity and justice aspect of this. And you can't deny access to course materials to your course due to a disability, which of course we don't want to do. We are going to also be in this session specifically working with web content accessibility guidelines. So you don't have to look at these, but basically this is a framework that defines accessibility for the web that is then used and accessed through web browsers, screen readers, and other assistive technologies. And WCAG guidelines have 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA, AAA being the highest and most exacting. Typically, we are aiming for AA, and that is mostly what the checkers that we have built into Canvas will do. And in this context, we are going to be dealing with Canvas pages, which means we're going to be using the rich content editor, that editor that you see when you are editing pages, but also when you're editing announcements, when you're creating assignments, when you're creating discussions and or posting in discussions, creating quizzes, the syllabus, in addition to pages. So the rich content editor and the principles of accessibility that we're looking at apply anywhere that you use it. The second thing that I want to point out here is that there are a couple of ways that Canvas helps us. One is we have the Ally Accessibility Checker that's built in and connected to the rich content editor. So as we can see here in the screenshot, I have a dial at the top right, as well as an indicator here at the bottom. This one shows me a percentage of my accessibility, 100% being the best, and this shows the number of issues that it's finding. And obviously some issues are more important than others. If you click on those, as we'll see here in a bit, those take you through steps to remediate those problems. So you don't have to know a lot of technicality and technology and the WCAG guidelines and HTML and CSS and anything like that. You just need to step through those and make the fixes as you go. You also have the option of the Ally Course Accessibility Report. This is turned on by default in your navigation, but students don't see it. So you may as well leave it on so you remember to use it. And that course accessibility report checks many more things. But again, like the other checking, these are imperfect technologies. They can't read your mind or the intent of the material. They can only use kind of definitions of particular guidelines that fit and don't fit. And we'll see this in action as well. So you can see this course has 88%. And in particular, I have 8 issues with PDF documents. And if I were to take a look at those, they would probably be scanned documents that don't have text associated with them. Remediation of that kind of content will be a future session. So let's go back to, and I always do this, let's go back to our course and turn the menu back off, make it a little easier to see. So let's take a look here at the first item of constructing accessible pages, the most fundamental, and that's the structure and headings of the page. And this is one of the most common problems for accessibility that I see, and often it's because of importing content. But basically in Canvas, you have heading levels 1 through 6, which are semantic divisions, logical divisions, dividers for content. Now, 2 things happen. One is people bring a document in from somewhere else. It starts with a heading 1, and that is inaccessible because heading 1 is reserved for the actual page title used by Canvas. So a screen reader would have doubling up of the heading 1s, which isn't allowed by the WCAG guidelines. So 2 through 6 are what you're going to use. I don't even know why heading 1 is allowed in Canvas for you to select, but you can, or it can come in. So here's an example of inaccessible use of headers. And this is where people have, or I have used headers to visually set something up on a page. So I started with a heading 1, which I shouldn't have. Heading 2 is where I should have started. And then I jumped to heading 4. And this is another problem with headings. In addition to using them for visual formatting, skipping as you're descending is a problem. So you have to go 2 to 3 to 4. When you go back up, you can skip back up any number of headings. So in this case, the skip from 2 to 4 is going to pose a problem. So let's edit this page and take a look at what the accessibility checkers do. This is something that they can tell. And I've also noted down here that I have a heading 6, and I see this all the time. People use that heading, which is available here if you go to the Formats, Headings menu. So heading 6 isn't available directly right here. But in any case, I've seen this all the time where heading 6, which is naturally tiny, is used to denote small text or something unimportant. But that doesn't work because according to a screen reader, that is going to look like an important section of the document, and it really isn't meant to be. And so there are other ways that you would want to work with that. So we can do 2 things here. We can click on the accessibility score or the accessibility icon, and we can go through remediating this page. So let's try that. And each of these functions slightly differently, but they all achieve the same thing. So this says I have insufficient contrast on this text. That was actually something I just did wrongly. So I'm going to put in a better heading color. Then I have the heading. So heading 4 is obviously not workable. So it's skipping a level. So I'm going to set it to heading 3 and apply. And you can see I can go through this and I can fix things. I'm going to make this heading 3 as well, just because I can. Because I can go back up, and then do not begin at level 1. Now you'll notice this says guidance is coming soon, which means the checker can't automatically fix that. But interestingly, the other checker can. So I can change this heading level to 1 and apply, and now, or sorry, 2 and apply, and I'm set. Now I obviously need to change some titles here. This you wouldn't normally be showing the actual heading number in there. So I would change this to match, etc. But as you can see, as I click through, this indicates what heading I'm actually at. And the checkers both are very happy with me now. So I've been a good person. I'm going to cancel that because I want to use this for future demonstration purposes. And let's go back to the structures and headings. Now, the fact that headings are meant to provide semantic or logical structure doesn't mean that they can't be changed. So you can use the headings, apply them properly, and then use the format menu items to make changes to how they visually look. Again, remembering that that's accommodating and working, or is going to work with people who can see the page. It's not going to mean anything really to people who are using screen readers or assistive technology like that. And they will often use these as navigation, which is why the structure is important, because then they don't have to start from the top of the page and work all the way down every time. They can use the headings essentially like a table of contents. So here I have my nice accessible headings, everything up to snuff. And if I now go to my formatting example, you can see I can make all kinds of changes to these headings once they're applied. And that's the important thing. Now, this isn't a great example of what I think you should do because it can be a little bit confusing. One, it's ugly. Two, some of the changes in size and font are misleading. So here I have a header 2, which is the top level of the document, and I go down in sublevels, which is all fine. I go deeper into level 4, which is fine, and back to the top. But then this bottom one is also a header 2, but it's been made to look through formatting small and unimportant. And that's going to be confusing to the users who are approaching this page visually. Oh, I do have probably another contrast issue here. So it doesn't like that that text doesn't have enough contrast. So I'm going to make it have enough contrast. See, I'm fixing things as we go. So the way that this works, if you want to style headings, I'm going to clear the formatting. This is a very useful tool to know if you bring in content from someplace else, is you can clear any extra formatting from it. So I guess I should do that from the entire header. Oops. Sorry, my mouse is, oh, it's back, okay. So now it's a basic top level header. And it's still the correct level, but now I can change all the formatting. And this is where I can get in and I can change the fonts and I can change the font size and whatever I want to do. But again, be careful that you do keep a visual representation that makes sense for your content. I am not going to save that, even though I have a problem to fix later. Oops. So headers, structure, use them in order when you're descending, format them appropriately, but make sure that the visual structure represents the logical structure. As you saw, you have those text formatting tools. You've probably used them before in other situations anyway, the bold, the italic, the font choice, etc. There are a couple of important accessibility items to remember here, and these are things that the checkers don't, for the most part, see. So one is, don't use visual formatting to create logical sections. So if you look at this sample document, these look like headers, but they are not. And so a screen reader, one, can't navigate using them, and two, is going to read them as if they are the same level of importance. There's going to be no way to know, and it's going to be kind of jarring when this is being read. And that's because screen readers do not recognize generally bold or italics or strong or emphasis. So you can't rely on that. And also can't rely on caps, and you can't rely on underlining, as for a reason I'll get to in a second. So you need to make the text read in a way that shows the emphasis through the text itself, not through the formatting. Again, the formatting is useful for people who are viewing the page, but if people are using these assistive technologies, it's going to be a problem. And underlining, which this is a common thing, and I forget and do this sometimes and need to fix it, underlining should only be used for links. That is both honestly better for visual users as well, because we get used to seeing the cue of the underlining and thinking it's a link, then we try and click on it, it's not, it's very annoying, but also because screen readers recognize and think the underlining is a link. In that context, your link should be named in a way that makes sense. So don't say click here and have the here be a link to something, because a screen reader can jump from link to link and it's going to get to a link and it's going to say here. What does that mean? Again, visual formatting and logical and textual conveying of information are just different things. Another area where you can run into accessibility trouble on Canvas pages are with lists. And this is particularly common when you're importing content from Microsoft Word or copying from the web. And what will happen is you'll get something that is a pseudo list. It looks like a list, but it's actually just using formatting and indentation and maybe, bullet characters to achieve the list format. And that just, again, is a jumble to screen readers. It essentially makes a list completely inaccessible. Now, with a good list, the screen reader can not only navigate item by item, it can say how long the list is, allow you to jump around, and identify that it's a list at all. So in this case, this is a good list, and I can tell it's a list in a couple of ways. If I click in here, anywhere in the list, I'll see down here this ULLI. If you know HTML, this is saying what the item is your cursor is in. This is in a paragraph. This is in a header 2. So now we're in a list. You can also just go to any list item, usually the first one, and try to select and make it a list. If it turns off, you're toggling, that means you have a list that's working. So that's great. That means it's a good list. We can continue to use those tools. I can add things at the same level, or I can bring them back to the beginning level, however you want your list to be set up. Now, a not so good list, I avoid saying bad list because that sounds naughty. On the not so good list, this has been formatted using bullet characters and formatting that's come over from something like Microsoft Word. So if I click in here, I have more of those indicators. One, it says I'm in a paragraph. It says I'm in a paragraph down here. Also, if I use the same test by trying to toggle the list, you see, oh, now it's actually creating a real list, which includes this other stuff, not good. So what I would want to do to remediate this is actually leave this as it is and create a list, get rid of my other bullet, and do the same thing here, get rid of my previous list and format it appropriately. Now I can, again, always use that tool to remove the formatting, and so I don't have anything extra in there. Usually you can tell that that's a bad list without even clicking on anything, because it will just look wrong. But that test that I've given you of trying to toggle the list back and forth is a way you can always check for sure. And note that no matter what we've done here, let me go back to having just the fully, poor list. Back to the beginning here. All right. So I have my bad list. The format checking, the accessibility checkers have no idea, because they have no way to know that you intend that to be a list or don't intend that to be a list. Now, I imagine that in the future, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, to be able to, read this in a way that's more human, there might be a possibility of doing more intense checks, but that's going to be resource intensive. It's just not something that happens within Canvas. There are other external tools that may do a better job from this, but again, we're working just in Canvas and Pages. So there are many times when you need to think about accessibility in a way that's beyond what the Canvas accessibility checker can check. I'm going to cancel this because I want to leave the bad list for future reference. And let's see if Canvas wants to cooperate. Awesome, it came back. Our probably the oldest accessibility item that most people have heard of is alt text. Basically, anytime you have an image in a Canvas page, you either need to give it alt text that describes the image, and that needs to do more than say what the image is. So in this case, I'm not going to say for this image attribute window or attribute dialog. I'm going to say something more than that. But I do need to keep it within 120 characters or less. And you access the alt text by selecting the image, or when you're placing the image, you'll get the same option. In here, I can put my alt text, or I can specify it's a decorative image, in which case the alt text doesn't matter and doesn't apply, and screen readers will generally just skip right over these. So notice I've said image attributes dialog box with alt text editing area, which is a little more descriptive. Now, if I made a really long dialogue or alt text here, I'm going to get flagged by the checker. So I'm going to put my back in here. You can see, oh, it pops up and says 1. Notice this checker doesn't see that. I don't know why. I'm going to go back in here. It says my alt text is more than 120 characters. So I need to fix that. So it lets me make edits here. And you'll notice that it will not let me save these edits until I get down to less than 120 characters. So I'm going to take care of the pseudo Latin. I guess I could leave that in there, but we don't want to. And I can apply that, and woohoo, happy balloons. This is now accessible. So every image, you need to make sure that you either have alt text or the decorative image option applied. Very simple, but easy to overlook. Again, especially when you're bringing in content from other places, or you're quickly uploading images, and there are just a lot of reasons that people skip alt text, maybe because it's tedious. But you will see that no matter how you place an image in here, like I can use the option we have in Canvas to add an image. I'm going to insert, oops, let's use the regular dialogue. I can upload from a computer, I can use Unsplash, and I can search. I wonder if I search for my name. There's some other Chris Lotz, I do know that. So I'm going to select one of these, and you'll see that when I put this image in, it gives me the same options for an image that's embedded from somewhere else as with an image that's uploaded. In any case, you need to provide that information, otherwise you're going to have issues with the accessibility. Cancel all that. Now, tables are a particular accessibility concern and issue. And this happens for a couple of reasons. One, even though the editors try to help with setting the appropriate properties and the caption for the table, it can get a little confusing. And two, because tables are often misused to create columns or to create visual alignments, and that's not what tables on the web using HTML or XHTML, which is what the language is underneath, that's not what it's meant for. Tables are meant for presenting data in a matrix, for presenting tables of data, not for creating columns or other visual alignments. So number one, don't use tables to do that. Second, if you do insert tables, then you have a couple of things you need to do to make them accessible. So I'm going to edit this page, and I'm going to put a table in. I've linked to a video there that shows how to do this as well. So I'm going to insert a table here. Yeah, let's make a simple 3x2 table. And now this table is not accessible. And the easiest way, honestly, to do this, rather than fiddling with all the menus and the step-by-steps, is just to let the accessibility checker do the work. And so one, you need a caption for a table. All tables need that. So I'm going to put Chris Lotz amazing quality. Apply that. And then it says it needs to set a table header. And in this case, it's basically asking, is the row or the column going to represent the headers, the items that describe either the columns underneath or the data to the right? I'm going to make this a header row because that's most column. You can actually use both. Now, you're not going to see anything visually here, but essentially what this does is this tells the screen readers that this first row are the headings and they aren't important in terms of information. And so don't repeat them and just view them in a different way, use a description tag, etc. So I'm going to say here, what are my most, Chris Lott's most amazing qualities of character? And I don't know. Fashionable person. And then in here, I'm going to put concentration. And you'll see that because I have set the table rows that are the headers, they get formatted a little bit differently. The caption shows up here. Coffee brewing, I'm giving colors and style. I have nice hats. But anyway. And that is an accessible table. You also have options with tables to access some of this information through the table menu. So I can go to my table properties and I can see some of this, show the caption or not. I can change also the formatting of the table in various ways there, which is most of the time what you want to do. And you can merge cells, set the alignment of cells. If I set the cell properties here, you can see it's set to be a header cell, etc. So in here now, because these are descriptive, we can make changes that are visual to set this aside for the users who are doing it visually. It does a little bit for you, but I could, for instance, set the text to be white and the background to be black, get something like that. Again, however you want to do that. The point is that by having the accessibility items in place, which underneath sets all these properties and does a bunch of fidgety things, that allows the screen reader to understand that this is tabular content. You just simply don't want to do it. Here's another thing you don't want to do is like to mimic a table using indentation, using spaces or whatever is allowed, and create this kind of pseudo table thing. No bueno, because that's going to be absolutely inaccessible to the screen reader, even if the English actually made any sense. This is also a place to make a little note about the Canvas media recording feature. Now, this is a really great feature that allows you to quickly add audio or video, or obviously both, to a Canvas page. But in particular, you can do it in the speed grader. You can do it and add to discussion posts. You can make comments using it anywhere that you have this rich text editor. So a great way of engaging students, especially with assessment, is to use video or audio comments. Say you're looking at a paper. It's great to hear from an instructor, particularly in online and hybrid environments where they might not get much of a chance to hear your voice or see who you are in other ways. However, Canvas video, Canvas embedded media does not have any function for captioning, which means these videos are not accessible at all, and there's not an easy way to caption them. You have to create a caption using some service or typing it yourself and setting time codes and uploading it. It just isn't ideal. Now, Panopto and Zoom provide at least decent auto captioning, and you can edit those captions. So when you're creating long-term content or real content, so to speak, think of the content that would roll over if you were to copy the class, you'll want to use Panopto or Zoom or one of those kinds of tools. You can continue to use and should use, I encourage you to use the Canvas embedded media. Just remember that if you have a student with an accommodation request who can't use the video or audio without the captions, it's not going to work for them. So you need to work around that and accommodate them by providing your comments in a more traditional way. Or I suppose you could use Zoom or Panopto, but that's going to be a lot of work. Because again, the nice thing about this is you can just go here and say, well, I want to record something, and I'm going to record this, and I'm going to allow it to get to my camera and my microphone. And here it is. Oh boy, we don't want to have that. I'm going to turn the webcam off. Or I can even go to the other webcam that shows even worse stuff. In any case, I can start recording. It's really simple. It gives me a nice countdown. This is great in grading. Like, oh, hey, that paper was fantastic. I really loved your thesis. You might want to do some, better checking of grammar because I noticed a lot of run-on sentences, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to give this a title. Nice countdowns. This is great in grading. Like, oh, hey, that paper was fantastic. Shouldn't have played it here. And then if you save this, whether you're in the speed grader making comments or in a discussion forum or here on a page, it's going to just render as video. Fantastic. The only issue is that it isn't accessible. And again, the media checkers, you'll notice, or may not have noticed, the media checkers here, the accessibility checkers, they do not show you that there's a problem here. The only way you know there's a problem is if you're looking at the page and you go to turn on captions, or you're using a screen reader and it's looking for the captions and you don't have that option. You can set the speed and the quality rating. Not ideal in that case. Again, this is where you want to think about too, the proactive versus reactive content and how you're approaching accessibility. I think this is a place where reactive accessibility actions are okay, because in general, the vast majority of your students, and usually all of your students, are going to be able to see and hear embedded content like this. So again, that's why we really say it's a great thing to use for grading and contributions to discussion boards and ad hoc things, maybe in an announcement. It's just not good to use for standing content, because retrofitting that standing content is something you're going to have to do if a accommodation request comes in and requires it, whereas you can simply not use that with the students who can't access it. in a particular class. So that balance between being reactive and being proactive gets a little bit changed, or changes a little bit here with this kind of content. If you really want to get a feel for what people using screen readers, which is the most common assistive technology, go through, or how it works for them, I should say, you can, if you're using Windows, and you're assuming you're with UW and have a NetID, you can get a free license to JAWS, which is the most common screen reader, or ZoomText, which is an application that kind of zooms in for the visually impaired, or Fusion, which combines both of them. So I would get Fusion if I were you. If you're on Mac, you pretty much need to use the built-in VoiceOver utility. And probably for that reason, I would imagine that most people who need assistive technology like a screen reader are going to be using Windows. But VoiceOver gives you a good chance to experience how screen readers work. And I have to say, I've been trying to use VoiceOver more recently, and it's a lot to learn. You have navigation you have to use by the keyboard, obviously, because it's not designed to use with a mouse for obvious reasons. And so navigating and remembering how to turn it on and off and how to access all the controls can be painful to learn. But once you do, you'll see all of the things that I'm talking about. When you have it read a page and you realize that the things that you've been emphasizing aren't emphasized at all because the screen reader doesn't recognize it, or the way that you formatted the divisions visually instead of logically, or at least not consistently, suddenly the things don't make sense, that the context gets lost, you really get a chance to see how that works. And it's great that you can get access to JAWS, for instance, because it's quite expensive if you don't have something like the UW access. Let's go back here. Again, I want to emphasize that you can always come to the Digital Learning News and Muse newsletter, which probably won't look like this whenever you're viewing it because we've been experimenting with some back-end issues. You can always come here and see the resources, including any presentation content, and when possible, open Canvas modules. This is what the presentation content looks like if you want to download it. You'll see it covers everything. It uses screenshots, and it will also have some more resources, most likely by the time you're viewing this. And the nice thing about this is that anytime I need to make fixes or changes, I'll be able to. And finally, I want to draw attention to one more thing, and that's the upcoming Passport initiative. Now, this isn't activated for real yet, but it will be next week. And the idea is that we're creating a digital learning passport, and you can earn stamps for activities. So for instance, in this, there will be an activity where you will create a page in Canvas that demonstrates your ability to create accessible content, including embedded images, tables, structural divisions using headers, etc. And if you do those things and share it with us through a link to your course or screenshots or whatever it might be, depending on the stamp, then we'll add your stamp to a page on our website, and you will be able to see other faculty and other instructors who have been earning stamps, and we will be having the possibility to earn stamps from other organizations on campus in collaboration with us, such as the Office of Equity and Inclusion, the Writing Center, things like that. So keep an eye for that passport opportunity, because I just think it's a fun way to kind of gather items together. At any rate, thank you very much for your time. Please remember the Digital Learning homepage is the place to go. If you want to find this or any other information, we really do have a lot of stuff here, so it'd be great if you take advantage of it. And you can always contact me at clott@uw.edu. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.